The purpose of this video is to show the various letters of the Coptic alphabet, most of which are derived from the Greek alphabet, apart from 6 letters which are derived from the native Egyptian scripts, I believe Demotic or Hieratic. And of course, then if you go back, they'll be derived from the hieroglyphs themselves in turn. And also to show how the Coptic letters are transliterated from the Coptic alphabet into the Latin alphabet that most of us here in the West or Christendom are familiar with. And I shall hopefully do another video on how the letters, after this, on how the letters are pronounced. So, these are how the letters are pronounced. We have alba, alba, wada, wada, gamma, gamma, dalda, dalda, a, so, so, or this can also be pronounced thou, thou, zada, zada, ada, ada, tada, tada, yoda, yoda, kabwa, kabwa, lola, lola. And just to go through them in a quick way, let you hear them, the more better rhythm of them, I suppose, of the letters. Alba, wada, gamma, dalda, so, sau, zada, ada, tada, yoda, kabwa, lola. Now this 6th letter, the letter after a, isn't it's classed as part of the Coptic alphabet, but it actually isn't a letter as such. The symbol simply represents the numerical value for the number 6, and the version I've written here is pronounced so, so with an S, so, and that's the feminine version. It could also be pronounced in its masculine form, the masculine form for the number 6 in Coptic, as sau, sau, sau. Which of course is a number. So every other letter here represents a letter apart from the 6th one in. So just continuing on from the previous page, we have the letters ma, ma, na, na, axi, axi, o, o, bi, bi, ro, ro, sima, sima, teb, teb, epsilon, epsilon, bi, bi, ka, ka, absi, absi. And I'll just go through them quickly, as you can hear the more rhythmical aspect of them. Ma, na, axi, o, bi, ro, sima, tab, epsilon, bi, ka, absi. We have here the final page of letters. So we have the letter O, O, O is simply a longer version of the other O, only based off the Greek omega, so it can also be called omega, omega, because it's borrowed from the Greek. And I'll put that in the subtitles as well, just to show how that's spelled. So we have O, O, then we have shy, shy, then we have phi, phi, then we have chai, chai, then we have hori, hori, janja, janja, jama, jama, di, D or de, and also we have finally here sambi, sambi, which once again, like the 6th letter of the Coptic alphabet, isn't actually a letter necessarily. It simply has a numerical value. In this case, I believe 900, 900, and it's called sambi, the symbol representing 900. Sambi, sambi. So I'll just go through them again in order here, just to hear them pronounced together. O, O, or omega, or omega, omega, shai, shai, phi, chai, hori, janja, jama, di, da, sambi. So we've now seen the name for each letter of the Coptic alphabet and how each name is pronounced. We now move on to what's called the jenkim or the jinkim. So, as I've written here, the Coptic alphabet also makes use of a diacritical mark called the jenkim or the jinkim. This is derived from the Coptic word for movement, and it is spelled thus, as you can see here, jinkim. So, what does the jenkim or jinkim look like? It takes the appearance of one might call a grave accent, and it is written above the letter of the alphabet to which it has been assigned. And you can see it here as if it was written above a letter, what it would look like. Now, the jenkim or the jinkim has two main functions. Its first function is that it is able to be placed over a consonant. Its purpose in this case is to show that there is a short alba or alpha, as we know it from the Greek alphabet, a short alba or letter a or a vowel that is to be pronounced before the consonant in question. So, for example, this, which is written below, is the Coptic word meaning there. Ammau, am-mau. So imagine the diacritical mark, the jenkim or jinkim, being as if it was written the letter A before the M, as if this word was spelt A-M-M-A-U, and it is pronounced am-mau, 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 meaning there. And I've written, and I apologize for the size of the text below here, this would actually be correctly transliterated, and I've written here that for those that don't know, that transliteration is the process of converting one alphabet into another, for example, the Coptic alphabet into the Latin alphabet. So this would actually be correctly transliterated as ammau rather than mmau as mmau. This is easier for us as Western Christians to comprehend. The ancient Egyptians originally used an abjad, and an abjad is an alphabet that only writes consonants and long vowels but not short vowels, and this meant when the ancient Egyptians adopted the Greek alphabet, they sometimes still omitted vowels, as they thought there was no need to write them, as a native Egyptian speaker would know the vowel already. In other words, they thought it was too obvious to write. However, luckily for us today, the dialect primarily used by the Coptic Church is the Bohairic, or Bohairic, as some people say, but I pronounce it Bohairic, the Bohairic dialect, which happens to use this jenkim or jinkim to let you know that there's a vowel before that, so they don't just spell it M-M-A-U. And therefore we know it's pronounced, this word above, meaning there in Coptic, is pronounced ammau, ammau. Moving on to the second primary function, or second main function of the jenkim or jinkim. The second thing that can be done with a jenkim or jinkim is that it can be placed over a vowel. In such an instance, its purpose is to show that the vowel is pronounced by itself as a separate syllable. So, for example, take the Coptic word meaning I, as in the pronoun I. This word isn't pronounced an-ok, it's pronounced anok, a-nok. So this purpose of the jinkim or jenkim here is simply to let us know that this A is not going to be pronounced with this N. It's not going to be pronounced an-ok. It's going to be pronounced anok, 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 anok. And I've written below here that first this word is transliterated as anok. However, it is not syllabified as an-ok, but rather as anok, anok, i.e., or the A in Anok, or the A in Anok is pronounced first as its own syllable, and then the nok part of the word is pronounced as the second syllable. And that is, so in other words, it's not denoting an extra a vowel here, as it did in the previous example. It's simply telling you that the a here, the letter A written, the letter alba written, is not pronounced together with the following consonant. It is simply pronounced as a separate syllable on its own. So we now move on to the transliteration of the Coptic letters from the Coptic alphabet into our Latin or Roman alphabet, or the English alphabet as some people might call it. So the Coptic letters can be transliterated into the Roman or Latin alphabet in the following manner. So alba can be transliterated in as the letter A. ⲿ can be transliterated as the letter B, despite the fact it makes a W sound mostly in most positions in a Coptic word. Gamma can be transliterated as the letter G, and delta can be transliterated as the letter D. And gamma, previously gamma, can be transliterated as the letter G. The letter A can be transliterated as the letter E, the letter E. Then the sixth letter of the Coptic alphabet isn't it cannot be transliterated because, as you can see here, I put non-applicable, NA, in speech marks, because it simply is a symbol, really, that represents a letter slash symbol that really represents the Coptic number 6, which is pronounced so or so, so, so. So, as I've said here, this is not a letter as such, it represents the Coptic number 6. So on this page here we have the letter ⲿⲙ, which is transliterated as the letter Z. Then we have the letter ⲿⲙ, which is transliterated as the letter E with a macron or a macron diacritical mark placed above it to indicate that it's pronounced long. Now, the pronunciation that I use for this letter is a, like a long A. However, of course, in the Greco-Paharic pronunciation of the Coptic Church, you will hear this pronounced as E or A. E or A. But I believe that historically it makes more sense, based off the vowels of ancient Egyptian personally, to pronounce this as A, and hence why I'm pronouncing this as the letter Ada. So A. This next letter is, of course, derived from the Greek letter theta, but it is pronounced as a hard sort of T. So we have tada, uh, tada, tada, and it's transliterated as a TH. We have then the letter yoda, which is transliterated as a letter I. However, you'll notice that in the letter itself is not pronounced as e-oda, it's pronounced as yoda with a Y. The yoda coming before a, as I say, I will do a proper video on pronunciation to explain that further, but it's pronounced as yoda, not eoda. It's yoda in Coptic. Moving on to the next set of letters, we have here kabwa. So, kabwa is, of course, derived from the Greek letter kappa. You'll see here that it is transliterated and pronounced not kabba, but kabwa. And that's because generally the B or wada, as we saw earlier, is pronounced as a W. But when you have two B's like this, the first B will be pronounced as a B and the second one as a W. So that's why it's the letter kabwa. Then we have the letter lola, which is, of course, the letter L. Then we have the letter me, with a short sort of A sound, me, for the letter M. However, you'll notice that it's transliterated as ME because the epsilon here, or which is this letter E, which of course in Greek and Coptic is derived from the Greek letter epsilon, is pronounced as a short A. So it's the shorter version of the letter ad, and it is pronounced me. Then we have the letter na, which is letter N, transliterated as the letter N, and it's has the same pronunciation pattern here as you see here. We have ma and na. So we have kabwa, lola, ma, na. On this page, we have the letter axi, with the letter A being pronounced here as an A, axi. As you'll notice that the letter axi is simply a K and an S, as in our English letter X, so it's pronounced kasa. So axi. We have then the letter O, which is simply a short O, and of course O here is derived from the Greek letter omicron, and so we have O. Then we have the letter P, the letter B. I choose to pronounce this as B, and not P. However, you can choose to pronounce it as P if you prefer. The Greco-Boharic or more modern pronunciation is it gets pronounced as a P. However, in the old Boharic pronunciation, which is of course itself a reconstructed pronunciation, it is pronounced as B, 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 instead of P, P. So B, letter B, and it's transliterated though as the letter P, P, as we would have in the Latin alphabet. Then we have the letter Ro, Ro, R, R, and that is transliterated as an R, an R. We then have the Coptic letter Sima, Sima, which is transliterated as an S, a S sound, Sima. Then we have the letter Tab, Tab, Tab. I do notice here the B in final position is not pronounced as a W. We don't have Tau, we have Tab, Tab. However, we have, Dab, we have Deb, the letter Dab, because even though it's transliterated as T, it is pronounced as a D. And this D sound will be, the letter T will be pronounced as a D sound apart from final position also. We'll see this in Coptic words as we go along. However, this is the letter Dub, Dub. So Sima, Dub, D, with a D sound. Then we have Absilon, Absilon, Absilon. Which is, of course, the Greek letter ypsilon, ypsilon, which is transliterated as the letter U. Pardon me. And it's generally pronounced in Coptic something like E, E. However, there is still debate to this day as to how this letter would have been pronounced historically, and it also has different uses, as we'll see in the video, hopefully, on pronunciation, when placed after the letter O, and it can help form diphthongs, and sort of it represents the letter W in that sense in some ways. But in this case, it's simply the letter U, so it's transliterated, and the letter is pronounced Absilon, and it's transliterated as the letter U. We then have the letter B, B, which can also be pronounced in the Greco-Boharic or more modern pronunciation as Fi, Fi, as like a F sound, as an English word, father, F. So we transliterate this letter as PH, which of course is more similar to how we transliterate the Greek version of the letter, which gets pronounced as a F, F, Fi, Fi. However, in the old Boharic pronunciation, which I intend to use, this is pronounced as B. So we have Sima, Deb, Absilon, B. We then have the letter K, K, which is pronounced as if it was simply K-A, K, K. Now it's transliterated as KH or KH. KH is the transliteration, but it's simply generally in the old Boharic pronunciation gets pronounced as a K. There is much debate between Coptic scholars as to whether the Greek pronunciation would have been retained in Greek words. That is, words that Coptic derived or borrowed from Greek, they might have pronounced it as a ch, and there's a few other sounds as well, as a ch or a sh in some cases, but other words might have been pronounced as k. However, in native Coptic words, it was always pronounced, they believe, as a k. I personally believe nowadays it makes more sense, with the mostly lack of native speakers, to simply pronounce it as a k, and it makes more sense in this when you pronounce the words, unless, of course, it isn't possible to fully know, because we don't know exactly how the native Egyptians would have borrowed these Greek words from during the Ptolemaic dynasty of Egypt, when after Alexander the Great's passing and Egypt had been taken over by his general Ptolemy, and the Greek language and the native Egyptian language sort of fused together to create what we sort of think of as Coptic. However, the language is mostly native Egyptian, but with a lot of Greek borrowings, especially when translating biblical texts, etc. So this letter is pronounced as ka, ka. and transliterated as KH, KH, K. We then move on to the letter absi, 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 which is transliterated as PS, PS. Now, this can be pronounced as apsi, apsi, if you prefer. I choose to pronounce it as absi, absi, uh, in keeping with how I was pronouncing the letter P previously, as a B instead of a P, absi, absi. However, there's nothing wrong with pronouncing it as apsi either. We then have the letter O, 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 the letter O, O, which is simply a longer version of the letter O we saw earlier. However, sometimes this will be also called the letter omega, omega, as in the Greek letter omega, omega. So it just depends. Some people spell it this way, as you see it written here, or it can be called omega. But in this case, it's just O, a longer O, O, as opposed to O, O. It's just sort of doubled. Then we have the first of the Coptic letters to be derived from the native Egyptian scripts. And this letter is called shai, shai, with a sh and I sound. Shai, shai, shai. The next letter is the Coptic letter phi, 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 and that's transliterated as the letter F. We then have the Coptic letter ⲿ, 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 similar to the CH in the Scottish CH in the Scottish word loch, 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 and it's never pronounced as ch, despite the transliteration here as CH. So despite its transliteration as CH, it is never pronounced ch, but ch. So the Coptic letter ⲿ, 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 ⲿ. We then have the Coptic letter hori, 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 which is transliterated as H. And it's simply similar to the English letter H. Hori, hori. We then have the Coptic letter, and this is personally my favorite letter, the Coptic letter janja, janja. This could be transliterated as a J or a ZH. And that's because it's not j as in our English word jam, it's j as in the French word je, or the sound in the English word measure, je, 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 and it's therefore janja, janja. So janja is transliterated as j, and I've put said h here in brackets just to remind you that it's je as opposed to j. Of course, there are other pronunciations in the Greco-Baharic dialect as to how people will pronounce janja. Sometimes it gets pronounced as a G, certain positions, except for example. However, I simply just choose to pronounce it as a je, je. We now move on to the Coptic letter ⲿ, ⲿ, and this is the CH that we have in English, as in ch, as in the word church. ⲿ, something like that, nowadays at least. There's also debate over how this letter was pronounced, and some people believe it went through nearly 3 stages of change. However, the simplest way to pronounce it, I think, is ch, and therefore we have the letter ⲿ, ⲿ. It's transliterated as TJ, or C with the little circumflex above it, which you'll recognize from some Slavic languages. Now, the reason for this is because you don't want to mix it up with the CH transliteration of the letter ⲿ, ⲿ. And this lets you know, if you transliterated, which letter it is exactly in Coptic. So it is the letter ⲿ, 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 and it is transliterated as TJ or C with a circumflex. We then have the letter D or Da. There are 2 ways to pronounce this letter. That's why I've written it twice. Some people choose to pronounce it as D, other people choose to pronounce it as Da. So D, Da. And it's transliterated, though, always as TI. I've written here TIE just to show you how that would transliterate, but really it should be TE, because it would only ever really be written TE in this case, because it's being pronounced da, not da, da. And finally, the final Coptic letter of the Coptic alphabet isn't, uh, strictly speaking, again, a letter. It's like the sixth letter of the Coptic alphabet, Ⲩ, simply a symbol or letter with a numerical value. Its name is sambi, 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 sambi. So sambi, this is not a letter as such. It represents the number 900, just as the letter or symbol Ⲩ represented the number 6. So sambi represents the Coptic uh, letter 900. The Coptic letter, sorry, for 900, or Coptic word meaning 900. It's simply a symbol, really, but it's included in the alphabet. And so it just remains for me to say, ⲭ and dotk. ⲭ and dotk. and duch, meaning thank you in Coptic. So thanks for watching, and hopefully this has made the Coptic alphabet a bit more comprehensible for those who haven't come across it before.